Yeah, so it was audio only for about 1 year and 2 months. And then after the Podfest conference I attended, which was my first podcasting conference, and that's really what opened to my mind to how much larger the podcasting industry is and how serious it can be and how connected and community based it is. And, they were really focusing a lot on video podcasting being the new big movement and the benefits of it. And, I said to myself, you know what? If you're going to run a podcast and you want your message to be heard, being on as many platforms as possible is important.
In today's episode of My Podcaster, we have Mr. Whiskey, a US Navy veteran, speaker, and the dynamic host of the podcast Couple of Nukes. Known for his raw and honest conversations, Mr. Whiskey dives deep into topics like suicide, addiction, and fate, all while offering a message of hope and transformation. His unique journey from a chaotic upbringing filled with trauma to serving in Navy's elite nuclear training pipeline has shaped his mission to help others navigate their darkest moments. With a blend of gritty wisdom and humor, he engages with a diverse range of guests, from military voices to artists, all sharing their stories of resilience. He's here to share his inspiring journey on how he built his show from the ground up and the impact he hopes to make in the world. Tell us your name and the name of your podcast and what your podcast is about.
So my name is Mr. Whiskey, and the name of the podcast is Couple of Nukes. So just a little context for that name. I was a nuclear operator in the United States Navy, and the show originally was supposed to highlight that community. And so it was about a couple of nukes, and we were sharing comedy and life advice and just having conversations. Now the show has branched into something far beyond that. I kept the name because I believe origins and where we started is very important, even if we've had to pivot in life, even if we've had to rebuild or change our lives. Remembering where we started and why we started is very important to staying aligned with our character. And now the show covers, essentially, it works as a resource center for self-improvement. And the idea is that anyone can go to the show and find an episode that will help improve some part of their life. And that's a broad topic, from whether it's sleeping or physical fitness or health to finances, careers, or flying airplanes. We try to cover as many topics as we can so that anyone can come to the show and change some part of their life. And I always encourage people, if there's something they want me to cover that hasn't been covered yet, and they want to either talk about it or have me find a guest to talk about it, I always do that because I want to make sure that we're helping as many people as possible.
How long have you been doing the podcast?
So I started December 3rd, 2022. So it's been a little bit here. What I will say with that is when I started my podcast, it wasn't going to be a full-time thing, really. I was still active duty military and busy. And so it was maybe an episode every few weeks with the goal of going weekly. Once I got out of the service, I was still figuring everything out. Civilian transition from military is a big process. And so I was busy, but eventually I got it to once a week. And then after I went to some podcasting conferences and learned a lot, I ended up also going YouTube and all of that. And so from there, I continued to develop further until right now, I am every other day with the goal of hopefully sometime this year, if not, definitely in 2026, every day being a daily show. But it's a lot of work. And as a podcast host as well, you know how much work it can be to imagine trying to get an episode out every day. It's a lot of
A lot
work.
of us are struggling to put out one every week, and here we are doing one every other day.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Just for us to step back a bit, the podcast is going around 3 years. I mean, I know the first when you first started the podcast, it wasn't as intense as this now, but it's about 3 years. And so when officially, when is the podcast completing 3 years?
So that'll be this December 3rd coming up. So December 3rd, 2025. And I am planning on hosting a mini podcasting conference in the form of a gala to celebrate, to teach people about podcasting, to raise some money for some nonprofits. So I'm currently putting all of that together. But like I said, that'll be the 3 years officially, but it's only been about 1 year right now where it's actually been a full-time thing, looking at it as a business as well as a hobby and really, getting into the groove of things. one of the things that I always tell people who want to start a podcast now is if I had been patient and done more research, I would have saved myself a lot of wasted time. I would have realized how big the podcasting industry is, how much work it is. And that's with anything, with business, with relationships, with life. Whenever you're getting into something new, I know we're always so hot to trot to just want to do it right away, and we want to start and we want to see our own show right away. But when you put in that time and effort to launch properly, I would have been at 2.5 years of the actual show now rather than that whole 1 year of trial and error. And you're always going to have trial and error on average for podcasters. Is about it takes 20 episodes to kind of figure out what you're doing, how you want to do it in terms of the questions you want to ask, how long the show is, how you like to edit it, and all that. But if you can get that done properly in the beginning, it'll save you a lot of time. I know it would have saved me a lot of time
Yeah,
too. So
but let's also be careful because some persons they spend about 5 6 years in that place still figuring out what to do. 10 years later, they're
yeah,
still trying to like do some research. I'm gonna start a podcast, but I'm just feeling the industry. I'm just taking a feel of what the industry feels like. And then someone has time to
yeah,
they've made all the mistake, learned everything that needs to be learned, and they've figured out the thing that works for them, and now they're doing having a show that works well. And yeah, I feel of course research is important, but I feel like we shouldn't take research as a means of procrastination. Like, oh, I'm going to learn about podcasting. Like 6 months into it, okay. So, okay, when are you going to start? Oh, I need to do some research. I'm not going to jump into it. And I'm like, podcasting is not like a life
yeah,
or death thing stuff. If you jump into it 2 3 months into it, and you realize that it's not for you, you jump out. No, no big deal. It's not a life changing decision. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
No, I really like what you said. Don't let it hold you back from starting, but also, it depends with your intentions too. So originally my intention was just to have a good time and joke around with some people and have a podcast. What I will say is if you want to be like a big industry professional, definitely do your research. But if you have a message you want to share and you just want to get it out there, you can definitely learn along the way. And I definitely agree. It's important for well, if no one ever made the mistakes, then no one's going to learn. So what I will say is if you just, and Chris Krimitsos, the founder of Podfest, he wrote a book about this called Start Ugly. And it's the idea of just start and you will learn and recover and grow. There never is the perfect time to start a podcast, right? I'm just saying definitely try to minimize anything going wrong that you can. And I think the most important thing is if you learn those hard lessons, be sure to pass them on, and like that's why this show right here exists so that people can, be like, wow, you know what? I want to start a podcast. Maybe I need to prep this more or do that more. Like for me, I started with a cheap microphone, no background. I was audio only, and I had to buy the equipment along the way. But, maybe you can buy it beforehand and it'll be nicer from the start. But yeah, and the biggest advice I will say is I launched with just one episode and then I didn't have another episode for a few weeks. And they say the best thing you can do is you are supposed to have between 3 and 7 episodes, preferably at least 5, so that people can consume more and they don't get interested and then they fade away because you don't release anything. So that was the biggest thing I regret is just throwing something randomly out there without a plan, at least with something where people could invest into. So
yeah. I noticed you mentioned that you said audio only. So right now it's going on to 3 years into the podcast. How is the podcast like? Is it video and audio or just audio?
yeah, so it was audio only for about 1 year and 2 months. And then after the Podfest conference I attended, which was my first podcasting conference, and that's really what opened to my mind to how much larger the podcasting industry is and how serious it can be and how connected and community based it is. And, they were really focusing a lot on video podcasting being the new big movement and the benefits of it. And, I said to myself, you know what? If you're going to run a podcast and you want your message to be heard, being on as many platforms as possible is important. So I said, if I go video, now I'm on YouTube, and then I'm also making social media clips for Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Some people also do X and TikTok. I don't do that, but there's a lot of platforms that having video content allows you to reach. And so I started doing video about 1 year and a few months ago, around last March or February. And from there, it's also been a process. So like when I first started video, it was just a copy of the Zoom call on YouTube. And then later on in life, I said, you know what? This is so copy paste. Who wants to watch this? So I made a decorative background that I didn't put the Zoom video on top of. And then later on in life, I said, you know what? Let's take it a step further. So now my latest videos, you'll see it has a nice sunset beach background, and then it has me and the speaker and our backgrounds on top of it. And then at the top, it says Couple of Nukes. On the bottom, it says right now it's season 7, and then whatever episode it is. So it just, even the process of making the video quality better, making the background better, making the descriptions better. I think podcasting is a continually improving journey. Even some of the biggest podcasters like Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, or Joe Rogan Experience, they're constantly looking at feedback and stuff to see how can we improve the audio, how can we improve the video, how can we reach more people. So many people focus in life in general on like this sprint mentality. They want to get it done now. Let's do this and that. It's a marathon, right? Our content is supposed to be, sometimes I make episodes with the intention that people are going to listen to these when I'm dead. Like it could be 100 years from now, and you got to try to make everything, it's with that mindset of, hey, maybe this video isn't going to get, 100 listens today. But 3 years from now, some famous person might hear it and promote it, and now it has 1 million listens. And I want it to be the best episode it can be when that happens. I treat every video and episode, you have to treat it like it might be the only one a listener ever sees. It's the first impression. Any episode of your show can be the entire representation of you and your company and your podcast. And so you have to make sure that every episode you make it like it's your only
Yeah, it's a
one.
good thing you mentioned that because recently I was like, I wonder, with AI tools you can do so many things. I was like, what if I had Marcus Aurelius as my podcast coach? What would he tell me? What advice would he give to me? And then he was giving me some advice, and there was one he said was like, oh, the obstacle is the way, and I was like, oh, the issue, the thing that you're struggling with in the podcast, that is the, and I was like, oh, wow, and I saw some deep advice that I was like, okay, I have to calm down. This is a lot to take in. We have to take a step a step at a time. And I noticed you about a year ago you moved from just being a hobby podcaster and now you're doing this thing um like actively like so what led to you from just publishing once every other week to now deciding to say, okay, I want to publish like almost every other day.
It's interesting. So in September that just passed, it was here in America, they label it Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. And that's one of the biggest topics covered on my show. Normally, I do at that time 1 episode a week on Monday mornings. But I said I want to cover on the second week of September, I believe it was the specific week dedicated to suicide prevention and awareness. And I said, you know what? I want to drop multiple episodes this week specifically focused on that. And I want to be a timely manner. And so that week I dropped 3 episodes and I said, you know what? I think I can sustain doing this, not just for this week that's dedicated to suicide prevention and awareness. I think at this rate, I could actually put out 2 episodes a week every week. And so I moved to twice a week. And then I said, you know what? Maybe I'll do 3 times a week. And then I said, you know what? Let's do every other day. Let's just do every other day and get out there and get after it. And it can be difficult because then I need to record. Like there was a point where I was recording for 10 hours a day, guest after guest after guest, in order to sustain that. Some podcasters, they record like maybe 4 times a month max, like some guests, but for me,
Yeah.
yeah, it could be a lot of work, but I like it. I love connecting with other podcasters, with guests, with hosts. I feel like podcasting, in my opinion, is one of the smartest, is one of the fastest ways to become very smart. And I say that in the all encompassing sense of every day I record with people almost every day, release episodes almost every day, listen to my own episodes and other people's episodes almost every day. And so I am constantly learning from people around the world in like right now in different countries. I mean, sometimes I talk to people from different countries multiple times a week, from India, from the Netherlands, from Malaysia, from the Philippines, you know. Sometimes I talk to people in the same state, you know, and sometimes I talk to people across America. And it's such a wide range for my show. I've talked to homeless veterans, I've talked to scientists, I've talked to pilots, I've talked to TV show stars, and every day I get to ask them questions and pick apart their brain, and they're teaching my you know listeners and audience, of course, but I'm also learning a lot about myself, my life, and then whatever they're talking about. And the best part as a podcast host is you get to guide the conversation. You get to ask the questions you want, and for free. Some of these people some of these people charge thousands of dollars to have a session with them, but because they're guesting on your podcast, you get it for free. I mean, it's a very beautiful benefit of podcasting that most people don't realize.
True. Yeah. The thing about podcast, because you're the host now, it's not like a class lecture where sometimes you're like, oh, I'm tired. Let me just breeze through the class. Right now, like even though you feel tired and you intervene the guest, you have to be in the moment. You have to listen, because how do you have a conversation with someone when you're
Right.
so
Yeah.
it forces you to like to learn, to ask questions, to it makes you to be actually curious, because you have to be curious in order to ask questions. If not, you're just going to be like trying to breeze, and there's no conversation.
Yeah, and one of the things too is I had a particular episode where the guest just like kept giving short answers, and we were at 9 minutes and he had basically told his whole life story. And I was like, well, I need at least 20 to 30 minutes. And I said, how can I continue this conversation if it's over? And we managed to talk for another 20 minutes because I was able to ask questions that really pulled information out
I
of
need
him
that.
and got the story.
I need that secret. I need
Yeah,
that
and so
secret.
it really teaches you.
What did you do, man?
Yeah, you know, it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I got to find something that is still related to our conversation that we can talk about, and it opened up a doorway to a whole bunch of other information and stories that you know we just weren't going to get into otherwise, you know. So, but on the other hand, I had a guest one time. I asked one question and her response was 45 minutes long. So sometimes, you know, you have to learn both ways. You have to learn how to get people to answer, and you have to get the secret to get people to not answer so much.
I feel like after doing a podcast, like I've done so now. I've done about across my podcast. I'm going on to over 200 interviews, right, with 200 different guests. I feel like right now having a conversation with someone, with a complete stranger I've never met or seen in my life, that's not really a big problem for me. It's not one of, you understand? Because right now we hop on the call. I've never met you. You don't know me. I don't know you. And boom, before you know, we're having a conversation. We're chatting. I'm like, wow. So it's one of those things. It's not really a big deal as long as I want to have that conversation. If I'm not interested in conversation, then that's the
Yeah.
problem would be. But if I'm like, oh, I just saw this person over there and I want to talk to them and I want to have them share their story. Now because the thing is, right now, there's, especially if you have a session podcast, there is a way you feel for people and what exactly delights them. Because then you realize that, oh, you're talking about the equipment, and and they're answering it, they're telling you, and then you're like, okay, what is how far have you? Can you tell us about okay? Can you tell us about the impact your podcast has had as on the community? And then you next thing you see the lights up, and you're like, oh, so this is their this is their delight. And then you're like, okay, this other one we're talking about, let's scrap it. Now let's talk about the main thing. And then you have them talking and talking and talking, and you're like, wow, wow, yeah. So it's a great learning experience. I'm glad.
Right. And the way you talked about how it's, you know, you're talking with absolute strangers. And I've had that, you know, the experience where because typically podcast hosts and guests know how to have a conversation, I've had plenty of episodes where I felt like, you know, this was a best friend of mine, you know, like the way we're talking, it's like I've always known this guy. And even though I just met him, you know, 10 minutes ago, and it translates into real life, you know, so I've gone to social events, I've gone to job interviews, and I've gone to other things where I'm capable of just talking to strangers because that's what I do for a living. I hop on Zoom calls and I talk to strangers, like you said, and it translates. And because My show is unscripted. We just have a conversation. It makes you great at improv abilities and talking on the spot. And so, like, when people say, "Hey, we need someone to just give a speech right now," like, I'm ready, like, because I am used to just talking on the spot, of storytelling, of asking questions, and I think it's a very useful skill to have. They say over 75% of Americans are afraid of public speaking, and even more so wouldn't do it if they had to, or could get out of it. And so to have this ability to just talk on demand in a concise manner, in an impactful manner, is really important. And I think it's a skill, especially the younger generations are losing as they get more and more buried behind the screen of that talking in person, of having that real communication. A lot of, especially, men and women in the field of dating, the idea of just talking to someone they never met before can be very awkward or intimidating. And I feel like I could go on 100 blind dates today, and I none of them would feel awkward, because I've done it with podcasting. Like you said, I've probably recorded with over 300 guests, maybe, or however many, and at the conferences I've met thousands of people. So it's like it's such a good skill to have, and it's really helpful, I would say, at least with the topics covered by my show, but even with your show, the ability to ask questions for parenting or intervening on someone who is not opening up about their emotions, and whether that's suicidal or depressed. Or I think I'm excited to be a father one day, knowing that I've done so much communication work on my show, and parenting advice and episodes on creating the right environment for people to open up and share. So it's a very important skill to have if you want to be a leader and a mentor and help people.
Yeah, I feel like when we were very young, our parents would tell us, don't talk to strangers. But now that we are like, now we've grown, now I think we should print a merch and you're like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah. I never thought of it that way.
ah,
It's interesting. It's like it'd be funny. It's like I've seen some people post online, like, describe your job without saying what it is, or
yeah,
describe your job in
yeah,
like the funniest or weirdest way you can. And
yeah.
that's one of those things. It's like, oh, I just call strangers every day and talk
Talk
to
to
them
them.
about my personal trauma.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you
Yeah.
customize it depending on your niche of podcast. Like if it's about let's say psychology, or let's say the podcast is focused on suicide, or I
Yeah.
talk to strangers about suicide or something like that. I mean, you could customize it in a way, but I talk to about losing weight. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, people would probably think I'm a therapist if I described the conversations I have on my show. I'd be like, people who were addicted to drugs come to me and tell me their problems,
Yeah. Like you wouldn't be
and they're
lying.
like, "Oh, you're a therapist."
Nah, you said it. Yeah. What exactly do
Right.
you do? I just told you. So you're a therapist? No, I didn't say that. Okay. So you're not a therapist? I didn't say that. Right, exactly you. I just told you. That's fine.
Yeah, well, even if, like, another way I could say, people might think I'm a relationship counselor, because I'll say, well, people, come to me and tell me about their bad dating experiences. They're gonna say, "Oh, you're a relationship counselor." No, I'm a podcaster. Huh?
Yeah, I mean that could be a bad line in either your Twitter or LinkedIn page. You're like, I talk to strangers for a living, or then you could customize it. I talk to strangers about their weird dating, some, and that's brilliant. Like people, it gets people like,
Yeah.
huh? Talks to strangers. Why? About what? Like, especially if you have a very niche podcast where it's like, oh, this stuff, like, or maybe it's a taboo talk. Let's say you have a podcast about sex or stuff like that, and like, oh, I talk to strangers about sex. Like, oh,
Yeah, no, it's funny. I remember um, because the one guy on my show, he was telling about how, like, if you're a podcaster, he said, I encourage you to interview your parents. He goes, when I interviewed my mom as a podcast host, I got to ask questions that, like, I never thought to ask.
oh,
He's like, it's such a great experience. I said, yeah, unless you run like a sexy and kinky podcast, you might not want to interview your mom then.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
That
that would
that
be a
might be a
brilliant
weird
idea.
conversation to have with your
Yeah,
mom.
that would be a brilliant idea. Just have them on the hot seat and get to. I mean, the chemistry would be way because first of all, you're in the same room. That's like, yeah, and then also, you know them, and then you get to dive deep to a lot of questions. Wow, and you're like, okay, why this? When I was young, what was the weird goal or dream you had for me? And then you're like, wow, That's
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and he said that he ended up thinking of questions that he never thought to ask his mom, as a child or anything, but as a interview host, he was like, you know what? These are the nitty-gritty questions. But I was just thinking on telling people about our jobs, like I was a podcaster in secret for quite a while because, it's a non-traditional path. And I figured my family wouldn't understand. They're definitely a more old-fashioned family. And I always like to quote, from the Bible that, there's no honor for a prophet in their hometown. The people who are going to be the least accepting of it are typically the people who are closest to you. I remember I also perform comedy, and I remember I was scared to tell my family that, oh, you're a comedian, right? That they hate to hear that. And I remember I told my grandma and my grandfather, and their reaction was just, "You funny? You telling jokes? You're joking? You doing
oh
comedy?" And I remember just thinking, I was like, I thought my grandma was supposed to be I thought everyone's grandma was always the woman that just said, yes, you can do anything. You're handsome. You're smart. You're beautiful. And my grandma was the first person to laugh at me for being a
yeah,
comedian.
I mean,
And I was like, I guess if you're laughing, I guess it works.
yeah,
I mean,
I,
that's the whole
I joke
point.
for
But
more.
yeah, my grandma didn't pay me though. She just hurt my self-esteem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I won't really blame them because most of them, they when you explain these parts to them, I mean, when we started in the first place, we ourselves we didn't even understand the parts, but we were curious enough to say, okay, where does this lead to? What could I possibly do with it? And oftentimes when you tell them this part, it's
Yeah.
just like right now if you tell like old school parents that, oh, make money play games, they're like, huh? Really? Get a good job. That's not a job. And I think a lot of people
People
that are
do that.
making millions of dollars doing that, just like millions, like, a lot
Yeah.
of them. And you're like, oh, I play video games, like, get a good job. What's that? Yeah, so it's really hard for them to understand. And I know the new jobs are popping up, and for most of them, they can't really see the significant impact of it in society because it has never.
Well, and with podcasting, people have such this like preconceived notion of what it is, right? And so podcasting, they just think of like these big famous shows they've seen or this or that, or they think, oh, you're just, complaining about life into a microphone. And it's much more than that. The income streams are varied. And what I've done with podcasting is leveraged it into writing opportunities, being featured in books or writing books, speaking on stage, to building online and virtual and in-person communities. There's so much more to podcasting than just people think, oh, you just sit behind a microphone and talk and maybe someone likes it. There's so much more to it. Like we kind of mentioned earlier, the connection with the guest has to be right. The content you're putting out has to be impactful. The show quality, all of that matters. And then what do you do with it? People think, oh, you just start recording and then some big company says, I'm going to run ads on your show. Do you know how many podcasters are actually monetized? If you look at the statistics, a very small percentage. All the big famous podcasts that people think that everyone is like, they're like 0.01% of the population. Only about 4% of all podcasters make it to 100 episodes. Over 50% quit by 10 episodes. So it's not an easy thing to do. People just don't understand that. Only about 50%, half of all podcasters have more than 20 people listening to each episode. That means half of the industry is only a handful of people listening to every episode. That growth is slow. I mentioned earlier, it's a marathon, and most people aren't cut out for a marathon. Just like in real life, if you took a bunch of Americans or people from wherever you are listening in the world and told them to go run 20 miles, most of them couldn't do it. It takes a lot of willpower and preparation and mental resilience. And the same with podcasting. Plenty of people will start a podcast, they'll do a couple episodes, think it's fun and easy. And then when they find out it's an actual job, it's actual work, they stop. And we call this pod fade. Pod fade, I'm sure you know about it. A lot of podcasters quit. There are podcasters who have been on my show who are no longer podcasting. Just a few months after I released an episode with them about their podcast, I've seen a lot of people come and go, and every day people join and every day people quit. Last I checked the statistics, it was almost 500, between 400 and 500 podcasters every single day who quit, but it is a $1 billion industry. But you have to really be prepared to be running that marathon for a long time before you see the, the trophy, the medals, whatever you want to call it, which in this case, the ads, the partnerships, the sponsors, the creating business programs from your show. It's a lot of work, and people don't understand that. They think it's either you just sit down and start recording and get paid. And I know I've had people on my show who I interviewed who said they started podcasting because they thought they would start making 40 grand a month the first month. It's not like that. There are influencers out there, podcasters who make several grand a month. I know podcasters who make over $1 million a year. I'm not one of them yet, right? But you can achieve that. It's just a lot of work, and you're going to see a lot of people quit. And you know what? When you see a lot of people giving up, I don't want you to get discouraged and say, maybe I should just quit too. I want you to say, look how many other podcasters failed and I'm still here. Even if you end up putting out one episode every few weeks and that's all you can do, if you're still doing what you can do, that's more than the people who quit.
Yeah. I want you to thanks for that advice. I that's like really, really important advice because a lot of persons they don't even. I think the reason why a lot of people quit and a lot of people are surprised is because they have, disappointment comes from having an expectation that is different from what actually happens, right? If I have an expectation that okay,
Yeah.
people show up, people could the tendency of let's 50% of guests that show up, they their book they will show up and then 50% might not show up, right? I know that I have that statistic in mind. That's up on the call, and the first guest misses, second guest he shows up, and I have a chat and we talk. But then if I have the mindset that 100% of the guests ought to show up, and then 100% of the guests doesn't show up, that's what I'm disappointed. I'm like, oh no, this thing is terrible. It hits me. Everything is not working out for me because I had this expectation up in my head, and now what's in reality is way different. So I am disappointed. It doesn't meet my expectation. So I feel like I've been let down. And that's what a lot of people have when they start podcast. Like, oh, podcast is like the new cash cow. It's gonna take me from zero to about overnight. And they started, they're like, oh man, this stuff is hard. And they are like jolted back to reality. And they either keep going or they just it's not.
And I think the most important part you said right there is, it's okay to start a podcast with the idea that you want to turn it into a business, but you should start because you enjoy it first, and you should make it a business second. Because if you go into it to make it a business, you know, it's just a different connection. And trust me, there are a lot of easier businesses to start than podcasting. Like I said, it's unless you have a lot of money to begin with to set everything up with a professional coach and a team and equipment. But at the same time, there are some podcasts that they started after me and they're already way more popular than mine. Sometimes the show just blows up overnight like that, and sometimes a show is undiscovered for 4 years and then it starts growing. You never know. You're taking a
Yeah.
chance. Like we said earlier in the episode, all it takes is, one famous or the right influence person to find your show and promote it, and there it is. But you never know when that's going to happen, and it may never happen. So I think you should do it because you enjoy it. You enjoy connecting with people. You enjoy putting content out there, and you should do it with that expectation, with, hey, maybe one day this will be something bigger, but I'm happy with what it is right now. You need to be happy with what it is right now. And every day when I put out episodes, I put them out with the mindset of, this doesn't need to reach 1 million people today. This only needs to reach one person, the right person today, you know? Because I put out my show not for popularity, but to help people. And if I help at least one person with the episode, then it served its purpose. I've had some people write into the show, hey, Mr. Whiskey, this episode changed my life or really changed my perspective, and I'm going to start making some changes in my life. That's why I'm doing it. It's not, yeah, I'd love an email from a big company saying, hey, we're going to start paying you every month to run an ad on the show. But what's more important to me, at least personally, is that, hey, this episode changed my life. Or I shared this episode with someone and they ended up not committing suicide because they heard your message of hope. That's the real payment right there. And there's a lot of podcasters who will say that and not mean it, but I truly mean that. Like I've yet to really see a lot of money come in from the show. Like going on 3 years this December, and I'm still working with the same almost level of income as when I first started. But that marathon mindset. I keep repeating that, but that's so important to
Yeah,
have.
I want us to quickly look at the operation and production of your podcast. Can you walk us through like the tools you use to produce your podcast, and you tell us whether you're the one producing everything from start to finish, and some of the like the expenses you
Yeah, and then that's the thing too. Running a podcast can be more expensive than one might think, you know. So, because I have to pay for my hosting platform, and the way most of those hosting platforms work, the more hours you upload, the more you
yeah.
pay. With my show being every other day, I have to pay the most expensive plan. And if I go daily, I will have to upgrade to a custom plan where I'm paying even more. You know, so I already pay that money each month to keep my show posted everywhere. And then,
Can,
do you have a
yeah, I do have
question?
a question. Like I noticed, right,
Yeah.
that there are some hosting companies that work for regular podcasters. But if you're doing a show every day, those regular podcast hosts won't work for you, right? I think a couple of I can think of right out of my head is Captivate F. I think that's about they charge about 19 hosting, but here's the catch: you are on downloads per month. So the moment you exceed 10,000 downloads, you then get to pay more. But the upload, the charges you get. Making sense? Yeah.
Mm,
Same
that's pretty interesting.
Captivate.fm, Transistor.fm, and a couple of others. So unlike Buzzsprout, Podbean, and Libsyn, and the rest that charge you for upload, storage space, these ones they charge you for like um the, the bandwidth. That's the total, the number of total downloads. So if you're a small podcaster like that, and the sweet thing about is that for Captivate FM, I don't use Captivate FM. It was this Spotify for podcast, which is free, but for Captivate FM, you get unlimited podcast, everything unlimited to start as a beginner. But then you once you get beyond 10,000 downloads, that's when you go to a higher plan, which makes sense because by the time you get 10,000 downloads, it don't matter the niche of your podcast, you're supposed to be making even if it's not like crazy amount of money, you're supposed to be making at least the money to cover the podcast cost. So it makes sense that by 10,000 dollars every month,
Yeah.
yeah, you should be able to like upgrade to the next plan. So
Yeah, so I use Buzzsprout, and the reason I still use them, even though they're one of the more expensive ones, is because I have a personal relationship with some of the founders of it, and they are also the company that paid for me to go to Podfest, which is when I actually started taking this full time. And you know, so out of respect for how the fact that I'm only here because of them, you know, out of that, I'm willing to pay that extra money as that courtesy, especially because I know the people. But yeah, I definitely encourage everyone to look into like whatever. And again, that was part of that research. You know, speaking of like the beginning, I had just picked the first one I found, which was
yeah,
Buzzsprout. But if I had done the research, I could have looked at the different companies, their different prices. But for me, it was just like the first thing I saw, all right, we're getting the show out
yeah.
today. You know, so again, that was part of that hot to trot mindset. And I get it. Anytime I make content, I'm like, I want to post this right now. And I'm like, no, Mr. Whiskey, you got to schedule it for the set time, this and that. But when you're eager to share and show off your work and connect with people, I get it. So I really do. But, you know, I had to pay for the hosting directory.
Yeah.
Then I pay for a Podmatch account, which I personally utilize to find guests for my show. There are a lot of free guesting platforms that I also use, but for me, being every other day, my goal is to find as many guests as possible. So I pay to find guests as well. And Podmatch is one of the only platforms, the only one I've ever found that also pays you for being a small independent podcaster by having guests and putting out episodes. So that's what I like because it is a way. And for a long time, I never used Podmatch. I met the guy who made it. Um, he was one of the first people I met when I started podcasting, and I just never used it. And I said, you know what? I've known this guy for 2 years now. I should probably check out his website, Podmatch. And wow, I missed out on money for all that time. Some of the people I had on my show were Podmatch members, and I had recorded with them for free. And I said,
Wow.
what an idiot! But you know, you live and you learn. But I had to pay for. I bought a microphone, I bought lights, I bought a green screen. You know, there's just some business costs as well because my podcast is part of a business. I pay, you know, annual fees on certain things. I pay for trips to go to conferences and cruises, but a lot of the stuff I pay for is optional, right? You don't have to go to the conferences, but I encourage you if you're trying to grow your show and learn to go to them, you know? And so There's just a lot more cost than I expected, right? I didn't expect to pay monthly. And you know what? What I will say is you could technically not pay if you just have it on YouTube. But officially speaking, it's no longer a podcast because a podcast needs an RSS feed in the technical world. So that would just be a YouTube show. But there are ways to quote unquote have a podcast, but then you lose all your audio only platforms. And realistically, that's what podcasting is it's an audio form that, is distributed through all those mediums. I will say the number one cost, like I said, is that monthly cost of the hosting platform. But everything else is kind of optional. Like my website, I pay every month to have that custom name, coupleofnukes.com. But I could have a website for free. There are free website designs. But to streamline and get it more efficient and for people to find me more easily and to have that custom name, I pay that because it's beneficial to me. My editing software, I use Descript, I use Zoom to record. Those cost money. I have paid AI tools for generating social media clips, for helping me edit episodes, and for creating content. Those cost money. So again, I don't need those. I used to record my show for free when it was audio only in Audacity, and I would edit it in Audacity for free. So podcasting can cost as much as you want it to cost. It just depends how streamlined you want to be. And there are a lot of free tools out there. So it just really depends what quality you want, what tools you have access to, and what you're willing to pay. And I highly encourage everyone, a lot of these tools, these AI tools, there are promotionals. There are ways to get discounts on them, whether it's through other creators who have custom codes or from sometimes if you go to cancel your plan, they'll offer you a discount code. Sometimes they do holiday promotionals. So always do your research to find out what is the cheapest you can pay for the best tool in terms of what you need.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. I'm curious now that you're doing the podcast every day. Is it the full-time stuff you're doing, or you used to?
Yeah, so it was what I was doing full time, but I did have some income saved from the military. But it got to the point where I could just do it full time, but I want to do so much more with it. I want to promote it. I want to have paid marketing campaigns. I want to create events. I want to create new opportunities. I want to travel to conferences. And so because I want to put more money into it, that means I need to make more money to grow itself. And so because what I need to make more money from podcasting requires money, I went ahead and I got a job, but I didn't just get any job. I got a job that was aligned with who I am as a person, as a manager in a leadership position, where I was able to have a job where I go and I train people and I make an impact. And that's in alignment with my character. So I don't encourage you to get a job that you're not aligned with just to fund your podcast endeavors. But if you want to, for a little bit, get a job that's high paying, but not what you want to do to grow your podcast, I would say do it. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices in order to grow. Like I might pick up a third job here just so I make even more money so that I can really grow my show. Because by growing my show, one, it'll lead to me making more money from my show. But more importantly, I want to have a bigger impact and I want to reach more people. And podcast isn't necessarily pay to play, but the more money you spend on marketing, the more people you reach. That's just how it is. There is organic growth. There is people just discover. Look, my show gets discovered by new people every day without me paying for any marketing campaigns, right? That's just how it works. The internet, once you're out there, you circulate around, right? But I want to market and find more people, and I'm willing to pay for that. Especially certain episodes I have, I want to market to certain people, right? There are certain episodes that are for women only, certain episodes that are for men only, certain age groups. And so I want the ability to reach as many of those people with that specific episode as possible. And I want to be able to travel to these conferences. I want to be able to host events. For my 3-year anniversary, I'm trying to host my own podcast conference in the form of a gala. And it's going to cost between $7,000 and $10,000 American dollars to do that. And so if I have to get a second or third job outside of podcasting to create that event, to get all those people together, to share information about podcasting in life, then I'm willing to make that sacrifice of my time and my health to do that. what I will say is don't burn yourself out, right? Don't be podcasting and then working another job and never sleeping or getting your you time. Please balance it. I am one of those people that I am a workaholic, and I definitely put my work before my health. But I have burnt out before, and I do encourage everyone to balance it, right? Your podcast can wait sometimes, your work can wait sometimes. Make sure you're being taken care of, because when you're not, your podcast quality is going to go down, your work quality is
It
going to
will
go
suffer.
down, and you could risk losing them
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Yeah. Can you like let us?
Yeah, so like I said, one of the ways is through Podmatch. That's not a lot of money, but it does help, like you said earlier, the most important part, at least meet the cost of podcasting, right? So if you can make enough through that, you can cover the cost of little things like your hosting directory or your website. And then I have affiliate links. There are people who make thousands of dollars through their affiliate links. There are people who only make some sales. It depends. Every affiliate link is set up different for how much money you make, what kind of commission you make, and all of that. And that's also one of those things where, to some degree, if people like that product, it's depending on the product or the service itself. But to another degree, you have the power to market it, right? So if you have an affiliate link and you just let it sit in your description, I mean, yeah, some people might go to the description and use it, but it's on you to create promotional ads for it from your episode with the host, or just making content online or hosting another episode about it, right? Those affiliate links are yours to market,
Yeah.
right? The host, obviously, whoever gave you the link wants you to promote it because it gets them money. But at the end of the day, they already make money through their product or service without your affiliate link. So that's more of a courtesy to you to get paid while promoting them. And so it's up to you to push out those links. So I have affiliate link ads on my show. So I don't get paid by companies to advertise their products on my show, but I went ahead and made ads for my affiliate links, because why not? I have room in my show for ads. And if a big company's not going to sponsor me yet, I might as well as go and use that ad room to promote products and services that I get paid for
And then reach
promoting.
out to them and say, "Oh, I've been promoting your affiliate products. This is how it has been performing with my audience. I feel like we could do well if we do a sponsorship." And then you're like, "Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is how it's performing. Your audience are clicking on it, so it's like you don't even have to convince the investor."
Exactly. Yeah. Here's what I'll say. Like, for example, I'm currently running a anti-smoking ad on my show, and I reached out to the woman who gave me the affiliate link. I said, "Hey, I want to run an ad on my show to promote this affiliate link and your service. Would you be willing to collaborate and make an ad, for it?" And you know what she said? Of course. I'm trying to promote this. Of course I'll make an ad for it to have on your show. So I mean, the people who are giving the affiliate links, they want to grow their platform, their product, their service, whatever it is, and they're more than open to collaborate with you, right? Because then both of y'all are getting paid. So I think when it comes to making money, it's just like anything. You got to take that risks, and you got to communicate, right? Worst case scenario, they're gonna say no, which is kind of strange of them to do, but at least you asked and went after that opportunity to advertise and promote and make more money. And then, of course, a way a lot of podcasters make money that people don't think of right away is hosting events, hosting online events or in person events where you are sharing your expertise or create a program or a course. I find that a lot of podcasters are also life coaches or producers or whatever it may be. And I think that's something that I'm currently looking at expanding into, being hired to produce podcast shows, to, maybe coach people on podcasting or other stuff, whether that was addiction recovery or just, men's mental health, women's mental health, whatever it is, right? So leveraging your expertise in your particular field for your show, and then having those masterminds, having those master classes, creating those events. And sometimes you start small. You only charge $5 or $10 a person. But as you build up your business, your podcast, and your authority, and more people attend, you can raise those prices, right? So it's just like any other business. You start small and you slowly grow over time. And the most important thing with podcasting is consistency. The more you show up every day when you're supposed to, the more that people will follow you, the better you are against the people who quit or are inconsistent. But most importantly, when you are consistent online, the algorithms and the internet recognizes you as someone who is reliable. And the internet wants to put forward reliable information. And that moves you towards the top of the page. Right now, if you look up Couple of Nukes, I'm the whole first page when you look up, because I show up every other day with new episodes, with all my tags and my name in it, and I am there doing that. So again, it's just building and leveraging opportunities to create paid programs that are unique to you and what you do, while still, and I put this forward because of the person I am, creating an impact and changing people's lives, right? Don't There are plenty of podcasters who are scammers. Don't be a scammer, right? If you're going to charge people, deliver what you are saying you're going to deliver
Yeah,
that value.
thank you so much. I noticed that you've had a lot of benefits from podcasts, not just financially. Right now have a lot of good and some plans for the podcast. So can you share with us some of the crazy benefits you had from podcasting and some of the crazy benefits? Sorry.
Yeah, like we kind of discussed so far, I would say the biggest thing is socialization and talking and leadership and communication, right? All of those I really grew from podcasting. And I would say that's the number one benefit. And two, just like knowing so much, learning every day from people around the world about so many different things. But also, you just learn about opportunities you didn't know existed or things you didn't know existed, and then you can explore that, right? So I had a guest on my show, and I talked to him about pursuing speaking opportunities. And he told me about these opportunities. I never knew they existed. I didn't know you could speak at these places or that these websites existed, and I wouldn't have thought to even look them up. So I think one of the coolest things is that you meet people who know more than you. A lot of people on my show, most people on my show are like 20, 30, 40 years older than I am, and they've lived a lot more life than I have. And so they have a lot of good advice. Or one of the fun things I like to do is anytime I have a guest on my show from another country, I always say, is there a word or a phrase that exists in your language that we don't have in America? And I like to, teach everyone something new culturally. And so I always like to do something like that where, you're learning something that you would have never even thought to look up or to want to know. It creates this curiosity in you that you just didn't have beforehand. And so that's what I really like. I would say the socialization is just the biggest thing, whether you take that into the dating world, the corporate world, or just other events. That idea of, being able to talk to people and having so many stories. It's interesting. I meet people who don't know I'm a podcaster, and they're just like, how do you know all this stuff? I'll be sharing stuff from like about Australian special forces and then stuff from like India or Malaysia or Africa or Canada, and these crazy stories and advice, and they're just like, how do you know all this stuff? And that's really cool in my opinion.
So
So
I want you to tell us where listeners can learn more about you
coupleonukes.com,
and kind
or
of
if you
like your
just
call
look
to
up
action.
couple o nukes, that's couple o apostrophe,
Uh,
because that's a southern thing here in North America. But the goal is that the reason I'd love for you to go to the website is just it's a resource center for help, where I have all the episodes in their own categories, all the guests in their own category, and you can go there and find stuff to change your life. It doesn't have to be the show. I mean, I'd love for you to listen to the show, but even if you just went through my guest catalog and found one of their books and used that, or found one of their websites and used that, or you just went to my episodes and found the resources in the description. I mean, my goal is to help people, right? It's not about me at all. So if you find people from my show who help you better than I do, by all means, go check that out. But if I can be the
yeah.
connection point for that, then I've done my job. So coupleonukes.com, like I said, I've got the show on over 20 different platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, all the other podcast hosting sites, from the small, unknown ones to the big ones. You can find it to listen to it. And my Instagram, my Facebook, LinkedIn, all the same stuff, Mr. Whiskey, Couple of Nukes. There's not a lot of people under those names out there. So I encourage you to just look those up to find me and hopefully find something among all my content that you can use to help your life, or if not, improve someone else's.
That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I am Wisdom Okonkwo, and I hope this conversation sparked new ideas and gave you a deeper look into the heart of podcasting. If you've loved this episode, consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Every bit helps keep the stories going. And hey, don't forget to follow, rate, and share this podcast with another podcaster or creator who would find it helpful. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.